tools, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning and welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, after surviving near-fatal childbirth, a crippling mental health crisis.
I began to see bugs crawling in my food, in my toddler's food.
We talked to the now healthy mother about the local resource she says saved her life. Then, an open adoption pioneer on the value of embracing extended families. She shares her own family story in a new book spanning 3 generations. And Jacksonville's newest pro soccer team scores a new home field and gets ready to kick off its inaugural men's season. We asked team co-founder Tony Allegretti about a proper home for the football club. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or head to firstcoastconnect.org. Stick around. We'll be back right after the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The State Department is telling Americans in the Middle East to leave the region as the war with Iran continues. The agency told Americans in more than a dozen countries to get out. However, the U.S. has also closed embassies and evacuated diplomatic personnel in the Mideast. It's not clear if there will be enough U.S. officials to assist Americans who want to leave. President Trump has said he expects military action to last 4 or 5 weeks, but he also says it could go on much longer than that. NPR has learned Israeli officials believe they may achieve their war goals in 2 weeks. Here's NPR's Daniel Estrin.
The question of war goals is a key one. We are hearing a lot of mixed messages about the goals. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was on Fox News yesterday saying regime change is the goal. U.S. officials, however, are walking back the idea that this is a regime change war. They're saying only that outcome would be nice.
NPR's Daniel Estrin reporting. Outside of Washington, D.C., some rank-and-file Democrats and Republicans are taking different sides on the U.S. war with Iran. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is in a competitive congressional district, and NPR's Frank Langfitt paid a visit there.
Tom Fink is a Democrat who served on a nearby borough council. The U.S. attack shocked him.
I was horrified. It just reminds me of Iraq and things that have happened before. And you wonder, where is Congress?
Patrick Basim has a different take. He's running for the York County Republican Committee and says he's glad to see President Trump trying to remove any potential nuclear threat.
I think it's a great day for the Iranian people. They should feel liberated. I feel liberated as an American not having to deal with that thought in my head.
Basim said he hopes Iranians can overthrow the regime and hold free elections. Frank Langford, NPR News, Harrisburg.
It's primary election day in 3 states, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Texas. In North Carolina, a Democratic congressional incumbent is facing a strong challenger who is backed by Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders. From member station WUNC, Colin Campbell has more.
Two-term Congresswoman Valerie Foushie's primary could be a litmus test for how Democrats view their party's approach to battling the Trump administration. Her opponent, Durham County Commissioner Nida Alam, says Foushie should take a stronger stance to oppose federal immigration actions, including an operation last fall in North Carolina. Alam supporters like Mark McClure say they're ready to replace Foushie with a younger, more outspoken Democrat.
I think that she's done a lot for North Carolina, but I think we need someone who's going to ratchet it up.
The war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza has been an important issue in this race. Now the candidates are condemning the latest strikes against Iran. For NPR News, I'm Colin Campbell in Durham, North Carolina.
You're listening to NPR.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. Right now it is 9:04. 3 months after the local state attorney's office closed its investigation with no criminal charges into a list of people who carried guns into some city buildings, Florida Attorney General James Othmeyer plans to initiate civil proceedings against the city of Jacksonville. The investigation from the state attorney Melissa Nelson's office determined that the list did violate the state's gun registry prohibition when names were recorded when visitors brought firearms into City Hall and the Yates Building back from July 2023 through April 2025, but it was a lack of oversight to blame rather than criminal intent. Uthmeyer says either city leaders were aware of the list or they failed to train and supervise their employees and bear responsibility either way. In a statement, Mayor Donna Deegan's administration dismissed the pursuit by the Attorney General as politically motivated deflections. The Florida Supreme Court has rejected a petition to block Governor Ron DeSantis' push to redraw the state's congressional districts this year. The justices say the governor has the power to convene the legislature in special sessions, and the Secretary of State has the authority to interpret election laws. DeSantis in January called a special session of the legislature starting on April 20th to redraw the state's House districts. That was the same week candidates were set to qualify for the ballot in congressional races, and Secretary of State Cord Byrd moved the qualifying week back to June. Lawmakers are currently in the middle of their 60-day regular session. It'll be warm for inland areas this afternoon in northeast Florida. No rain in the forecast today.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Lodestar Foundation, inspired by the maxim that helping someone else less fortunate is a path to a happier, healthier, and more meaningful life. Learn more at lodestarfoundation.org. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
A trained neurologist says she missed the signs of psychosis her own postpartum brain was sending. Welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler. Today, how a new mother fearful she would hurt her own baby found help with a local program for new and expecting mothers. Later in the program, a First Coast author literally writes the book on open adoption with 3 decades worth of perspective. But first, having barely survived the birth of her second child after a life-threatening hemorrhage, Dr. Bobbie Decker was nothing but grateful for the first few months. Then her postpartum psychosis began. It's an experience she recently recounted in a powerful editorial, crediting the Jacksonville-based Motherhood Space with providing the lifeline she needed for recovery. I had a chance to sit down with that organization's founder and Dr. Decker to talk about providing better care for new moms, whether in crisis or not. Let's take a listen. Dr. Jill Garrett, director and founder of the Motherhood Space, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks.
We're also joined via video by Dr. Bobbie Decker, neurologist and mother. Dr. Decker, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Dr. Decker, you recently published an op-ed in USA Today. It also ran here locally in the Florida Times-Union. Just an incredibly powerful account of your own postpartum experience. And it started with nearly fatal childbirth experience. Can you just start there and tell us what happened?
Yes, I actually developed severe preeclampsia and ended up being induced and unfortunately had something called placenta accreta. And so I delivered normally and ended up having pretty significant and severe postpartum hemorrhage. And so the moments that I remember in the delivery room were happy and wonderful. And then all of a sudden the tone changed very drastically. I was rushed off to surgery. I had life-saving surgery with a hysterectomy. And I was very fortunate to have the care that I had in that moment.
And so that in and of itself was a fairly traumatic experience. But as you say, you received the care you needed. You had a healthy baby girl. You went home and were recovering. And so there was this period where things seemed like they were all right. Is that true?
That's absolutely correct. I felt very fortunate to have come out the other side. And I was so grateful to my healthcare team in that moment. And an important part of my story that I also didn't talk about is that this was my second daughter, both that I had to use IVF to become pregnant. So this was very much a planned pregnancy. This was very much an anticipated pregnancy. We were very excited about this. We felt very prepared going into this. And one of the things as well that I think I didn't write about in the piece is that I had some postpartum anxiety that I recognized after the birth of my first child. And I knew that I probably would benefit from some extra support. So during my pregnancy, I actually had become connected with a perinatal therapist that I was seeing. And I was doing so well after my delivery. And I was with a perinatal psychiatrist at the time that I was actually about to be discharged from their care when all of this nightmare started.
I'm going to ask you, you didn't write about this, but I'm curious what your thoughts are if the intensity of that experience in the hospital and the intensity of the recovery and the surgery in some way perhaps led you to downplay feelings afterwards because you were so grateful, so thankful for being alive, for being able to be there with your family.
Yes, I think so. I think that really had an impact on me because I knew I was very grateful in the moment, and I knew that I had survived something very hard, and I knew I had two beautiful children that I was extremely excited about. And I think a lot of it was I was in survival mode for several months after my delivery with my recovery, just physically, and not recognizing perhaps some of the emotional component of it, certainly. But I was almost going back to work as a physician. I was getting ready to return to work when things really took a turn for the worse.
And so tell us what was happening at that time. You started to experience some really intense hallucinations, some troubling images. Tell us what you were experiencing day to day.
It was somewhat of a gradual onset when I look back, but it was very difficult. It was so isolating. I would walk into the room and I would see my baby, and my baby's head would be at a 90-degree angle, would be just at a sharp angle. And I was convinced that her head was truly looked like a square, and I would have to walk over and actually touch her head to break that image. And then I started to not be able to see people in the same room as me. I began to see bugs crawling in my food, in my toddler's food. I have a very vivid image of talking to my sister-in-law and watching her hover above her body. And then it evolved into very intrusive and dark thoughts that I didn't have control over, but I didn't know why they were happening. Thoughts of things that you worry about, could I see myself doing to my child, to myself? I talk about in the piece going on an afternoon walk on a beautiful afternoon day in Florida and being in the sunshine and exercising, which was a very important part of my therapy, and cars driving by and having the vision of just throwing myself and my child in front of the car.
We've introduced you as a doctor. It's probably worth noting that you are a neurologist, and your husband is also a neurologist, and you know from the brain. Do you have some understanding of what is transpiring with people when they have a neurological disorder or when they're having some sort of hallucination? What were you interpreting your own experience as? How were you seeing your experience? Were you able to recognize it as something was amiss?
Yes, I think I was. And my husband's a neurosurgeon, and we both have this understanding and commitment to studying the brain for a living. I knew that something was wrong. And I did, as I said in my piece, wake him up in the middle of the night and say, I can't be left alone with this baby. It was very humbling, and it was very frightening, and it felt very real. It was my reality. It was my reality. It wasn't something that it's very difficult to explain how real all of those things were for me. And my husband gradually noticed as well changes in me that were not like he had seen before. And he was very quick to pick up on them too. But actually, some of the biggest insight came from my wonderful pediatrician. She would always ask how I was doing at visits. And she knew the trauma of my birth experience. And she actually gave me a lot of good insight. And I think I said to her, I don't know how attached I feel to my baby, and I'm worried. And she said something along the lines of, if you, on a primal instinct, if you were, a lion in the safari giving birth to cubs and you nearly died, your instinct would be to abandon those cubs and walk away.
Wow.
And she said that really resonated with me, to know that it wasn't my fault. We know also that structurally, the brain changes remarkably, not only during pregnancy, but in the postpartum period. And so there's evidence scientifically to say that these changes happen. And I was aware of all of that, but until you go through the experience, it's extremely humbling.
It's so interesting. Dr. Jill Garrett, I want to bring you into the conversation to talk about, first of all, this experience, to tell us a little bit about postpartum psychosis, what it entails, how maybe it's different from what we often think of as just postpartum depression.
Yeah, so when you are pregnant and postpartum, you are more susceptible to experiencing challenges with your emotional health. And we in the field call these challenges, any emotional challenge that occurs during pregnancy or postpartum, perinatal mood or anxiety disorders. And so those are things like depression, anxiety, OCD, psychosis, any emotional health challenge. And Bobbie mentioned a number of risk factors that she had that made her more susceptible to experiencing some of these challenges. But you're asking also a little bit about how these are playing out in terms of prevalence. We know that perinatal mood and anxiety disorders are really common. In fact, as many as 1 in 5 moms and often 1 in 3 moms in certain populations are going to experience a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. OCD and anxiety and depression, those are a bit more common. Postpartum psychosis is a little less common, but it obviously still happens.
And how does it manifest? Is the story that Dr. Decker was telling us, is that resonant? Is that kind of what you hear or have seen in your own work?
So I'll kind of differentiate perinatal psychosis and perinatal OCD because sometimes there's a little bit of an overlap or a misunderstanding between the two.
Okay.
Psychosis is when we have delusions or hallucinations that we don't see, that other people cannot see or hear. And then when we are thinking about psychosis, we also think about that as a psychiatric emergency. This is when we have higher risk of things like suicide or infanticide. And the person is not connected to reality, not realizing that it is not, in fact, there. OCD is a bit different in that we have these intrusive, scary, and or distressing thoughts or images that pop in our mind. The difference between psychosis and OCD is that with an OCD brain, we have the awareness that this is distressing. So Bobbie's talking a little bit too about some OCD characteristics, this idea that, oh my gosh, I'm having these scary thoughts. I don't even think it's safe for me to be with my baby, which is really a common thing we hear when moms are suffering from OCD.
And so the experience she's having where she's imagining, say, insects in her food, that might be a manifestation more of OCD, whereas
when she's seeing her sister-in-law hovering out of body, that's more of a psychosis.
Yeah, it can kind of be broken down, and we have to kind of tease it apart a bit more. And so for practitioners out there, we really kind of work to say, all right, one, is this distressing you? And two, is this something that you're realizing is not real, or is it kind of outside of kind of what others can see or hear? But she had a bit of what she's describing as a bit of a mix of the two. In postpartum psychosis, we notice usually that it's a pretty intense onset. It tends to occur in the first few weeks after delivery. There are a number of risk factors. One of them is having a previous mental health history. Others include things like sleep deprivation, which are obviously quite common, or medical complications. We know, too, that lots of folks who have had discontinuation of medication for things like bipolar and or psychosis in the past have a higher rate or susceptibility to experiencing psychosis, too.
Does her experience in the hospital, that sort of intensive surgical near-death experience, make something like that more likely?
Certainly, it adds to risk across the board. And it also adds to risk of anxiety, right? And so she, of course, experienced this really hard, traumatic experience. So it's not uncommon to experience not only trauma symptoms, but some of these distressing, scary thoughts about health and safety of baby and loved ones.
So what do we know about how the healthcare system is changing, if it is, to recognize both the intensity of the risk that can come with some of these experiences, but also the timeline on which they occur and the need to kind of monitor moms perhaps beyond the first few weeks?
Yeah. I love how Bobbie mentioned that her pediatrician was a really big piece of her recovery. It's not always common, but it's great to hear that we have providers across the spectrum who are not only assessing baby and child, but mom too. And I think we also heard Bobbie mention that return to work was on the horizon for her. That's a time that we see kind of stress amp up a bit more, symptoms begin to kind of emerge more.
Interesting.
And so across the spectrum, we have this captive audience, right? So we have moms who are pregnant and going to appointments. They're postpartum and they're going to appointments oftentimes just to make sure their baby is doing okay. So we really have an opportunity. And when we have programming and supports where we can capture this, that's really, a really big piece of the puzzle here.
There is a part of the op-ed that you wrote where you're talking about care fracturing after a woman gives birth. And very often there is this 6-week checkup, all important, Dr. Decker, where, they measure the baby, they make sure everything sort of seems on track. And then at that point, it's kind of, we'll see you when it's time for your next round of vaccines. There's a point at which that care, that intensity of care that has been ongoing in many cases throughout the pregnancy seems to taper off. Can you talk a little bit about that, how that impacts your experience and also what might be done about that?
That's exactly right. As every woman who has gone through a pregnancy knows, you get to know your OB very well, especially leading up to the time of delivery. And then you give birth and you know that you need your 6-week checkup. And then after that, it's a little bit lost about where do I go for what, but also there's so much focus that then shifts to the child. We're constantly going to the pediatrician for wellness visits to make sure the child's progressing. And it's very difficult to then navigate the medical system sometimes as a mom, especially as a new mom who may not have consistent ongoing care with a primary care physician or a specialist because of another illness. And so that can be extremely challenging. And that's where I think the opportunity comes in to think about where in the healthcare system are moms accessing care in all forms, and where can we potentially intervene and screen.
Yeah, and it is difficult for new moms to find even the time to go see their own primary care once they've been cut loose by their OBGYN, because they are reserving that time very often for those well baby checkups. So tell us, in your experience, you did find some help, and it was through the local organization here, the that Dr. Garrett founded. But can you tell us how you discovered that offering and how it helped you recover?
I was in the right place at the right time. And I had the most wonderful care team available to me. I, being able to have that access of care, I had, as I mentioned, a therapist and access. Was doing an intake with the psychiatrist the day that I was going in to be induced to deliver. And I had a safety net there. When things escalated, I was able to get into the motherhood space. And it was such a game changer for me. It really was. And to speak to the motherhood space and what Dr. Garrett has done, it's an amazing place where women find common language and common ground to share their experience and to find strength in themselves and strength among each other. Dr. Garrett knows this, but the first day that I was signed up to go to the motherhood space, I pulled in the parking lot and I wasn't going to get out of the car. And I certainly wasn't going to get out of the car and go into a room in a group full of women and share my experience, because I felt so alone and so terrified in that moment. And as somebody who, advocates for women's health in their career and really has conversations all the time about things like that, to then have that immediate shift of I can't be vulnerable. And the day that I walked in, I immediately found the conversation to be something extremely beneficial, and I no longer felt alone in my struggle.
So how did you come, Dr. Garrett, to create the motherhood space? Tell us about just how that even became an idea in the first place.
Yeah, so I have 2 girls, and I had my first daughter about 11 years ago. And at the time, didn't notice there was a ton of mental health support as a psychologist and now a mom, and a mom who had heightened anxiety after my daughter was born. I thought, gosh, we could do more. And so I was fortunate that Baptist was receptive to this idea of creating a maternal mental health service line within Baptist. And then I was meeting lots of moms and thinking, gosh, we really need to do something that has more of a group component, because like Bobbie mentioned, the piece that we hear over and over again is this idea of I was at home struggling and I felt so alone. And then people come to join the program and they immediately have this sense of relief of, oh, I'm not the only one. And oh, there are a lot of good things I can do to feel better. So it's been just a really neat ride to be able to have this vision I created come to reality in the motherhood space.
And she describes arriving there still being reluctant to step out of the car. What is happening for a woman when she is starting to, recognize that she might need help? What is holding someone back at that point? It does seem that there is still a lot of, guilt or shame around, people who are anything but, if they're feeling anything less than just 100% healthy and enthusiastic and attentive to their child, they feel like they're failing.
Yeah, so you kind of hit the nail on the head there with guilt and shame. But it's also kind of scary to do something different and new, and then to do it in a space where you're in a group. So we do what we try to do to have an individual appointment with patients before they join the program, just to get some information and to share some information, and then also to hopefully offset some of that fear. But yet it's still scary to try new things. And her sentiment of sitting in the car and being worried about coming in, we hear over and over. And so I truly applaud all of the moms who come in for a number of reasons. One, they're not feeling well when they come to us. This is oftentimes maybe the worst they've ever felt in their lives, and in a time when they're kind of supposed to, quote unquote, be feeling good. And yet they have made the call, overcome the fear, pulled their car in, and stepped in for help.
Are we doing better societally when it comes to perhaps making a broader understanding of what the experience might actually be like, or helping to tamp down some of those feelings of inadequacy if you don't feel that way after having a child?
I think there's room for improvement, and particularly in the age of social media and TikTok and all of the access to perfection. There are also some moments where we have opportunity for vulnerability. And in the motherhood space, we are oftentimes giving people that opportunity to recognize the discrepancy between this idyllic world of motherhood and then the true reality of motherhood.
That's interesting. My experience as a mother predates that period. And I understand, though, that it is quite stressful currently for women who are pregnant or about to have a child, experiencing the pressures of social media almost in the way that young people do, that vulnerability, that feeling of wanting to kind of compare, and this image that's presented very often of just perfection.
Sure. And, comparison is the thief of joy. And when you have it right in front of your face that you can scroll through all the time, but even if you're not on social media, there is oftentimes this internalized perfection that parents have. And that's something we work to move through and mitigate too when people come to the motherhood space.
And so when we're talking about the need that exists, Dr. Decker, and your own experience with the motherhood space, I'm curious what motivated you to write this op-ed in the first place. What are you trying to communicate to people through your own difficult experience?
I think the number one thing would be to bring this to the front of discussion, because without acknowledging that this is an issue, many women will continue to suffer in silence. And there's a lot of strength in being able to reduce the stigma around this. And I felt once I had written this piece that if I couldn't speak about it, who could? And I felt that I was in a position of saying, I am so lucky because, again, I was in the right place at the right time. And how many moms aren't? And just bringing awareness to these issues and making sure that women know that they're not alone. And one of the big themes in the motherhood space is you're still a good mom. You're still a great mom. It is not indicative of all of how you are as a parent, how much you love your child, and that, good moms can have bad thoughts, and it's not you. It's not a reflection of how much you love your child, and you're not alone in this.
So we should say, if you're watching the live stream, it's clear that your family is beautiful and whole. You've got two lovely daughters, a picture with your dog and your husband as well, 2 dogs. And so it's clear that it's possible to move through this and move beyond it. And it's important, I think, that you're sharing your experience. But I do want to ask, just Dr. Garrett, what do we know about consequences when women are not able to find the care that they need?
Yeah. So first off, it can be devastating. There is a high risk of things like suicide and infanticide with psychosis that is untreated. So again, that is a medical emergency. But if you are even struggling with things like depression and anxiety and you're not getting treated, it's going to impact your relationships, not only with your children, but with your family and everything else you're doing every day, be it work or school. And that then in turn kind of shifts into our community. And so we think about this oftentimes as just a mom issue, but it's truly a public health issue.
It is something, too, that I would guess in the long term can change the way that you look back on your experience as a mom, or perhaps even your relationship with your child.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I really like to point out to people is their insight here is a strength. And so the folks that we see are recognizing that they have some room for support. And when people have that insight, use it as a superhero strength and come in and or access support.
So in terms of accessing the motherhood space specifically, this is still one of very few programs like it in the country. Yeah. I believe that in her op-ed, she said it's about around 40 in the country. And so it is specialized care and limited. What is available for women who don't have that resource available? What is out there right now?
Yeah, so we are one of only about 40 in-person programs in the country. We're the only one in Florida that is in person. And so it's quite unique. It's also unique in that there is this wellness emphasis in our programming. So we not only offer folks a guest pass to the YMCA where we're housed so they can have that wellness piece, but we also do other things like walking therapy and trauma-informed yoga. But to go back to your question, if people are looking for support, one of the things we also created was a YouTube channel. And so we recognize that there are barriers to getting support. Maybe it's time, maybe it's childcare, though we've tried to offset that in our program because we offer no-cost childcare for the Motherhood Space. But we have a YouTube channel where moms can hop on for no-cost, short video vignettes that give you some different healthy strategies for coping. I also mentioned Postpartum Support International is a great resource, and it offers a lot of different things, including free weekly online virtual kind of groups that are running the spectrum from things like bipolar to military moms. So it's another good resource as well.
And if you can access the Motherhood Space, which insurance covers in many cases just with a copay, it really does sound like such a warm and welcoming resource. It's a often 3-day-a-week program where women come in for 3 hours a day. There's free childcare, transportation can be provided if they need. And it sounds like something that almost any mom would enjoy, having that sort of connection and that time. But it is for people who really are in crisis or on the edge of it. Is that right?
Well, honestly, we have people who are in crisis, but we also have people who are just struggling with the adjustment to new parenthood. So it's not required that you be in a severe space, an acute distress. It might be that you're just finding that it is really tough, because that's what we notice, and that happens a lot.
Dr. Decker, I just will kind of give you the last word on this. Having written this very moving editorial, have you gotten good response from it? Are you hearing from people? And what's your hope in terms of its impact?
I've had an incredible response. I've had an incredible response from somebody writing to me from across the country about their own experience from postpartum and the impact 40 years later in their life. I've had other physician moms share with me their stories. And I've been encouraged that there's been a lot of dialogue among the physicians that I've had the opportunity to connect with about how can we change things, how can we do better. And with this piece, again, I really hope to bring awareness and advocacy. I actually also mentioned the Maternal Mental Health Leadership Alliance in the article, and they have a national advocacy day in a couple of weeks that I'm planning on attending, where we speak with legislators about advocating for, continued funding for supporting maternal mental health. And so it's been an incredibly positive experience, turning this very dark moment into hopefully some light for pushing forward a better path for moms to come.
Well, Dr. Bobbie Decker, thank you so much for sharing your story and your willingness to talk about it here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Dr. Jill Garrett, there will be a link on our website to the Motherhood Space. But thank you so much for coming on and talking about it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And we'll be right back. Welcome back. In 1992, when Linda Sexton and her husband began building their family, there were few guideposts in the world of open adoption. Her new memoir provides 3 decades worth of perspective, including from 4 birth parents, birth grandmothers, adoptive parents, and her 2 children. We're joined now by Linda R. Sexton, author of The Branches We Cherish, an open adoption memoir. Linda, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Anne. It's my pleasure.
So you set out to write this book in order to share your story. Obviously, it's a memoir, but what other goals did you have?
Yes, Anne, adoption has changed so much in the 30 years since we started, and it has come from roots of being closed and secretive, where the goal often was actually to replace a family, replace the biological parents with a new family. And there was so much closed and secretness involved, but the children were really the ones that had a big loss, not knowing anything about their biological families. So today, most people don't know this, most adoptions are open. In fact, close to 90% of the domestic adoptions are open today. And because of the history of the closed and secret adoptions, most people don't know that.
What is an open adoption? Explain to us how that's different from what you're talking about historically.
Yeah, so historically, in the closed side, oftentimes the biological families and the adoptive families never met each other. And they were matched by some agency or an attorney or by another way. So today, in the open world, what happens is an expecting mom and dad, if they're available, can actually choose the parents to for their child. And oftentimes they go through interviews, and they can interview several people, and they get a match that makes sense to them for their lifestyle and their own desires. And then together, they decide how they want to stay in contact for a lifetime. And this can be as little as just sending letters and pictures, all the way through visitation as the children grow. And 30 years ago, my husband and I chose the visitation route, and we were really pioneers to do that.
And you say when you began, you would ask the folks at the adoption agency, what should I expect? What's going to happen? And they were sort of like, we don't know. I mean, we can kind of give you some help for the first few months, but after that, we really don't have any experience. There had been only a few years that they'd even been doing those kinds of adoptions.
Yes, that's so true. And they really couldn't help us through this. And, it was a scary proposition because we thought, how awkward is this going to be to raise a child with the birth mom in the picture? Or if birth mom comes back and holds her baby, is she going to want that baby back? And then how's the child going to feel about this? So there were so many questions. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book, because I've got the answer, what it was like for us. And the truth is that for an adopted child, knowing their biological connections, having the ability to see people that look like them, that have their own quirks, hearing a birth mom or birth dad tell them about their story firsthand and why they made an adoption plan, they feel the love from their biological family and their adoptive family, of course. It's not co-parenting. So, that's also a scary thing. People think, well, is this co-parenting? It is not. But it is so healthy for the child to know their roots, and it's a real gift for them.
It seems like it is not only the trend, but probably harder today to keep an adoption history secret. There are laws that provide for some level of access in many states in terms of, somebody who's interested in finding their birth parents, social media. There's all of these genetic tests that can some ways help people connect to other family members and perhaps find their birth parents. So it seems that on both sides, there's sort of this push to be more inclusive, perhaps, or recognizing birth parents and allowing children to broaden that relationship. But there's also this kind of factual reality, which makes it a lot harder for those to be secret in the first place.
Yes, that is very true. I mean, I've heard stories time and time again where people find out that they're adopted after they went through 23andMe or, did some of this bio testing, genetic testing, and they learn about things. And of course, that's pretty unhealthy to learn about things later in life. So it is much more difficult to keep a secret. But at the end of the day, this idea of replacing a family just doesn't make sense because we're all part of nature and nurture, right? And adoptive parents can do wonderful job nurturing a child, but that nature is so strong and you just can't hide it, right? So they used to try to hide it and it just didn't work. So fortunately today, most of them are not hidden anymore.
So I want to talk about how this worked for your family and for your children in particular, and the benefits that kids can glean from an open adoption. But I also, before that, just want to ask, in terms of birth families, very often they are having a pregnancy or a child at a time that is difficult for one reason or another. They're making difficult choices. They may have had a relationship end or perhaps an experience that they don't want to be thinking about. And so how is there still an instinct on the part of some birth parents not to want to be involved, not to necessarily want to be available to that child just because of the circumstances of the pregnancy?
Yes, that is very true. Not every expecting mom or birth mom, if they make an adoption plan, wants to be that involved. I say for us, we were very, very fortunate that both the birth mothers for our children did want to be involved, and there was a lot of benefits there. But I would say that when a birth mom and or birth father, if he's available but doesn't want to be included, that is perfectly valid and it happens. But there's usually someone in the biological family that you can connect with and that wants to be involved, whether it's a grandmother, an aunt, an uncle, that kind of thing. And that's one of the things I would encourage anybody to find someone in the biological family, even if it's not the birth mom or dad, so that you can keep some connection for that child.
So what would you say? I know that logistically you had to do some flights to connect with the families, and that was not easy. But in terms of the practical challenges of having these relationships with birth families and sustaining those, what were some of the difficult points?
Yeah, I will say it's not easy, right? And we were in different states, so in order to see each other, and early on we saw each other about once a year, and one of us had to fly to get there. But staying connected was just, you have to make it a priority. And what I found was that it was particularly like at the holidays and things like that, we had to stay in touch with our own family as well as all the birth families. So the bottom line is you just have to make it a priority and you have to open up your hearts and your minds to how important this is.
Tell us what your children gained from having this kind of broader, expansive view of family.
The number one thing they gained was that they felt incredible love from not only us, but from their biological families as well. And the other thing they gained is seeing people that look like them. And finally, there's great joy in that both of my children have biological brothers and sisters now, and they can know these people and have a relationship with them. And I find that for my kids, they get great joy when they see their bio siblings. And that's just been a real plus in their lives.
You also talk in the book just about some challenges of adoption that aren't necessarily specific to open adoption, but just relationally, some issues that your children went through in childhood and kind of you had to work through with them.
Yes, that's very true. And there is something called, well, they call it the primal wound, but when a baby is separated from their biological mom at birth, it is a traumatic experience. They don't remember it consciously, but it is a psychological traumatic experience. So what that means is that they are vulnerable to things like attachment difficulties or fear of abandonment, or maybe even having some anger that they don't understand where it comes from. And when both of my children were particularly in the teen years, I saw some of these things come out. And I wasn't particularly educated at that time to recognize that there was adoption-related issues that came with them. But my children did have to have therapy, and a lot of it is rooted in the fact of their adoption.
Well, I want to end on a positive note because the book really does showcase a success story for your family and for your children who are thriving and doing very well, as are you and your husband.
Yes, thank you, Anne. They really are, and I am such a proponent of open adoption when adoption is necessary, and it is primarily for the benefit of the child.
All right. Linda R. Sexton, her book is called The Branches We Cherish. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Anne.
All right. Up next, Sporting Jacks unveils its plan for a new stadium and a whole lot more.
The Players' Championship returns to TPC Sawgrass March 10th through 15th. Watch the PGA Tour's top players and enjoy local bites at the stadium course in Ponte Vedra Beach. More info and tickets available at theplayers.com. Here Tomorrow provides no-cost, no-wait suicide prevention services in our community. The nonprofit will host its 5-year celebration, A Night of Promise, on March 21st. Tickets and information available at heretomorrow.org. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Highway, hospital, home, work. Where injuries happen can make a difference in the law and the outcome.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
It's the sound of trust, of calm, of clarity. The sound of WJCT News 89.9. Bringing the world to Jacksonville every morning with NPR and local reporting that leads the way.
The Trump administration says it's battling illegal immigration, but the real war it's waging is behind the scenes against all legal immigration.
A normally operating Congress would be demanding oversight. That's not happening.
How the White House and Department of Homeland Security are shutting down legal immigration pathways to the United States. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
For months, the Department of Homeland Security has been plagued by allegations of chaos. Meanwhile, the funding fight over DHS and a partial government shutdown continues. Now, U.S. and Israeli airstrikes in Iran over the weekend are adding pressure to reach a funding agreement for the agency amid national security concerns. What's happening at DHS? We check in next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, can a city have more than one stadium of the future? Sporting Jacks leaders announced plans yesterday for a new all-inclusive sports district miles from downtown. Here to tell us more about the big news is Tony Allegretti, the Chief Community Officer for Sporting Club Jacksonville. Welcome back, Tony.
Hey, good morning, Ann. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here, Tony. So Sporting Jacks yesterday announced its new permanent stadium will be near Town Center. This is a 15,000-seat stadium. Tell us, first of all, why that location was ultimately selected, because you guys have been tossing around ideas and looking a lot of places.
Oh, my gosh. Well, yeah, we could do a whole show on real estate in Jacksonville. You know, we're the hottest city in America for a reason. It's really difficult to find spots, and we probably looked in earnest at 50-plus spots. This one was amazing, and it's the reason that it was available is because the family that owned it really wanted to wait until someone bought it all, which we're doing. So it's really just fortunate for us. It's in the dead center of town. So I was just talking with David Luckin. The beaches are accessible. The whole city and our friends to the south and the north are accessible.
So at what point did you guys decide that this was going to be not just a stadium? Was it dependent on this parcel and the size of it, where you said, all right, instead of just a facility for games, we're going to be building this entire entertainment complex, residential, hotel, the whole 9 yards?
That's a great question, actually, from the inception. So when we started the team, we knew, sports in America, except for the NFL, really, it's very difficult. The margins are very thin. So you need different facets around your project. And so having hotels and entertainment and different activities, and really creating a community amenity was super important and part of the deal, which is one of the reasons that it took so long, because you have to have a lot of acreage for that.
And you guys recently hired this new all-star developer guy that's going to be handling that. I guess that's sort of part of the reason that he's involved, is because there's so many different elements to this project.
That's right. We needed a development CEO, Mike McNaughton, and he has hit the ground running. He brings a tremendous background to what we're doing. He's already got tons of interest from brands. I'm not allowed to talk about any of them. I think they tell me some of these things so that I will slip up and they can fire me. So I'm not going to do that. But there's a lot of really amazing interest, things that Jacksonville hasn't seen before that are that will be coming to this project.
So people who know Tony Allegretti know that you are a huge booster of downtown Jacksonville. This is not downtown. And as we mentioned, there is already plans underway for a big stadium project with multi-use and all of that downtown.
Right.
Is this competing?
No. So it's actually filling a gap, right? So between Daly's Place and the Stadium of the Future, we really don't have a 15 to 20,000 seat place that someone could do a 3-day festival or lacrosse finals or high school football state championship. There's all kinds of things that we can do. We could do literally bring in a pool and do swimming. We could, have ice hockey. A lot of things that we can do here that probably aren't really viable. One of the things that we're dedicated to is making it more accessible to the community than potentially the Stadium of the Future. It's not super easy right now, before and after probably, to book an event at the Stadium of the Future. With us, you will be able to do that, and it'll be accessible for all kinds of great ideas and fun.
We talked a little bit about traffic. Sometimes people complain about traffic when they're coming on JTB and trying to get to the town center.
Yeah.
You encourage them not to get off at Gate, right? And to actually go up to 295.
I was surprised that you didn't know that. You can do 295 and get off at UNF. It's the first exit after you get off of JTB. 295, and it's right there. It's how I always go to our matches, which are at Hodges, which is a stone's throw from the site. It's never really been that bad for me, but I do understand. Like if you're, if you live there and you're going through that, it's very important to us to have. We're doing traffic study after traffic study. We're talking with JTA about how to improve access. We want maximum mobility, and if we can take a couple cars off the road, even better. So this is something we are very interested on. I'll just say this too. Like right now, if you were a sailor at Mayport and you wanted to go to a match at UNF and you got on a bus, the buses run so late out there that you could literally go have some beers with your friends, watch the match, and get back to your to Mayport. So it's like that all that happens. We need to do a little bit better, I think, on destinations and choice ridership, but we're into that, and we're going to do our best to take cars off the road.
All right, I've eaten all the time talking about the stadium, but the games are starting. This is the inaugural
Saturday.
men's USL Championship. You're hosting the Hartford Athletic.
Yeah,
this is the first game of this new men's portion of the league.
That's right. Yeah, it's Saturday, 7:30. It's going to be amazing. We have a massive tailgate right out front, food and beer. Please come out. We're going to make some history and hopefully beat Hartford.
Yeah, well, we got to do that.
Yeah.
Tony Allegretti, it's so great to have you here. Thanks for catching us up.
It was awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, and thank you for listening. Join us tomorrow when we meet a self-described kitty CSI team investigating possible cases of animal cruelty. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The Florida Theater presents Pat Metheny. The jazz guitarist, composer, and bandleader brings his Side Eye 3+ tour to Jacksonville on Tuesday, March 17th at 8 p.m. Tickets and information available at floridatheater.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.